Have you ever been in a place that looked peaceful on the surface? Families, laughing kids, playing the sky clear, but deep down you could feel something was coming, like the air itself was holding its breath. Before we dive into this story, I want to know what time is it where you're watching this and what country are you tuning in from? Drop it in the comments below. Because what you're about to hear isn't just about a fight, it's about discipline versus intimidation, calm versus chaos. And it starts in the most ordinary of places, a small park at the edge of Fairfield, Connecticut. The sun was dipping behind the trees that lined the neighborhood's edge, bathing the park in warm, amber light. It was a typical Saturday evening. Children's laughter echoed near the swings. Teens kicked soccer balls lazily across the field. Parents chatted, holding paper cups of coffee, some lost in conversation, others scrolling on their phones. And under the tallest oak tree near the far bench sat a 16-year-old boy in a black tailored blazer, crisp white shirt, and polished black shoes, reading, "That boy was Kai Thompson." He looked like he'd walked out of a private academy brochure, but tonight he wasn't there to impress anyone. He was there because of a promise he had told his mom he'd wait for his little brother Jaden, who was finishing up his soccer practice nearby. Kai didn't belong to any of the small groups huddled around the field. He didn't laugh loudly, didn't scroll through TikTok like the other teens, didn't even glance up when people passed by. Instead, he sat in perfect stillness, one leg crossed neatly over the other, flipping through a thick paperback book with worn pages and highlighted lines. Occasionally, he'd glance toward the field to spot Jaden number 7 in blue socks dribbling toward goalposts. There was a rhythm to the park's energy, a stillness that felt earned, but that rhythm was shattered in an instant. The distant rumble of motorcycles broke through the evening air like thunder across water. Not one, not two, 5 of them, roaring louder as they turned off the main road and rolled straight into the park's gravel lot. At first, no one paid much attention. Motorcyclists sometimes passed through town on weekends. But this group wasn't passing through. They were arriving. 5 men clad in weathered leather jackets and dark jeans, their boots heavy with dust and attitude. At the front of the pack rode a burly man with a shaved head and mirrored sunglasses, Rick Savage. His arms were thick with ink, and his presence alone felt invasive like a storm cloud rolling over a picnic. Behind him, Dax and Lenny. 2 younger riders followed with a swagger that demanded attention. They parked near the soccer field, dismounted with deliberate slowness, and scanned the area as if they were looking for something or someone. Their eyes eventually locked onto Kai. It was subtle at first. A glance, then a second. Then something sharper, calculated, like they were singling him out. Kai felt the stare before he even saw it. His peripheral vision had picked up the shift. His instincts, honed from years in the dojo, told him the energy in the park had changed. He looked up briefly, meeting their eyes. No fear, just curiosity. Then returned to his book. But inside, a quiet tension stirred. He didn't know who they were, didn't care, but he understood one thing clearly. This wasn't coincidence. These weren't just guys out for a ride, and they weren't finished with just staring. A few more pages, another glance. The group hadn't moved on. In fact, they were still watching him, murmuring to each other. The park continued its dance around him, unaware of the silent shift beneath the surface. Parents still chatted, kids still played, but Kai could feel it. The kind of pressure that builds slowly like a temperature rising in a closed room. He closed his book, not out of fear, out of focus. He reached down and slipped it into his small canvas bag, careful, methodical. Then he looked up again, and this time Rick was already walking toward him. Each footstep heavy, deliberate, purposeful. Dax and Lenny followed a few paces behind, their eyes fixed on Kai as if he had something they wanted, or maybe as if they simply wanted to provoke. The gravel beneath their boots crunched louder than it should have. Kai's heart began to beat faster, not out of panic, but preparation. He was raised on a simple rule: never show your fear. His mother had told him that more than once. His sensei had taught him something even sharper. Awareness is the first defense. Kai slowly uncrossed his legs, his spine straightening as his muscles settled into readiness. He didn't stand, not yet. but every inch of his body was alert. He studied the man's posture, his gait, the set of his jaw. Rick was about to speak, and Kai could already hear it before the words came, something meant to challenge, intimidate, maybe even provoke a response. But Kai wasn't here to be anyone's target. He was here to pick up his brother and walk home. That was the plan. Still, he knew now this night was no longer going to follow the plan. Rick Savage came to a slow stop a few feet in front of Kai, his shadow stretching long in the soft evening light. He didn't speak right away, just stood there sizing Kai up like a man inspecting an unfamiliar piece of furniture in someone else's house. Dax stood to Rick's right arms, crossed and chewing gum, while Lenny loitered to the left, hands shoved into his pockets, shifting his weight from one boot to the other like he was bored already. But their eyes all said the same thing. They were looking for a reaction. Kai didn't give them one. He stayed seated, calm, his hands resting lightly on his knees. Rick finally broke the silence with a smirk and a voice that sounded like gravel. "What are you doing here, kid?" It wasn't a real question. It was a challenge, dressed as curiosity. Kai looked up, eyes steady. "Waiting for my brother," he said plainly. No stammer, no fear. Just words. Rick tilted his head slightly, pretending to process the answer, then gave a low chuckle and glanced back at his crew. "Waiting for your brother," he repeated mockingly before turning back to Kai. "Cute," Dax chuckled. Lenny snorted. The air around them thickened. "This doesn't look like your kind of place," Rick continued, letting the sentence hang, half a threat, half a test. Kai didn't take the bait. "It's a public park," he replied, meeting Rick's stare without blinking. His tone wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't weak either. Rick's smirk faltered just a fraction. Dax uncrossed his arms, shifting closer, his boots crunching the gravel. Lenny spread out a little to the side, starting to form a loose semicircle around Kai. To anyone else in the park, it probably looked like three men casually chatting with a teen. But Kai knew better. He could feel the way they were boxing him in. Strategically, quietly. The field behind them was still full of voices and laughter, but under the oak tree the tension was pressing in like a vice. Rick took a slow step forward, closer now. "Got a smart mouth, huh?" he said, his voice a notch lower. "Think you're clever in that fancy little outfit?" Kai's jaw tightened, but his expression stayed composed. Inside his mind was moving fast, cataloging every step, every angle, every threat. His sensei had once said, "In a real fight, your first weapon is your awareness. The second is your control." Kai didn't want to fight. He wasn't here for that, but he also wasn't going to be bullied. "I don't want any trouble," he said, voice measured respectful but edged with steel. "I'm just here for my brother Rick," leaned in, his breath reeking of beer and something sour. "Who said anything about trouble?" he whispered with a grin. Kai didn't flinch. He didn't move, but every muscle in his body was awake. Then, before anyone else could say another word, a small voice cut through the air like a stone skipping across water. "Leave him alone." Kai's head snapped around. Heart. Lurching Jaden. His little brother stood about 15 feet away, still in his soccer uniform, cheeks flushed from running, his water bottle dangling from one hand. Sweat glistened on his forehead, and there was a tremble in his voice, but his eyes were fierce. Rick and the others turned surprised and then amused. "This, your brother Dax said with a laugh, pointing at Jaden. "That's adorable. Maybe we teach both of you a lesson," Lenny added, voice full of mockery. Kai stood slowly, deliberately. His movements were calm but precise, like an archer lining up a shot. He stepped forward just enough to place himself between Jaden and the bikers. "Don't touch him," he said, voice flat, firm. The bikers chuckled again, but there was a shift, a hesitation. Kai's stillness, the quiet intensity in his posture, it didn't match the image of a scared kid. "Look at this guy," Rick said, laughing. "Stands up like he's Bruce Lee or something." But Kai didn't move, didn't blink. His silence was louder than any insult. It made the bikers uneasy, though they didn't admit it. They stepped closer anyway, pressing the line. Rick leaned in again. voice now low and taunting. "You scared, kid?" Kai exhaled slowly, centering himself. He said, "Just one word, one truth." His heart was racing. Yes, but not with fear. With focus. He didn't care what they thought of him. He cared about Jaden, about getting them both home safe. The bikers weren't backing down. Not yet. Rick's hand twitched at his side like he was thinking about shoving Kai, testing him. Kai braced, but he didn't move first. His instincts screamed at him to act, but his training held him back. Discipline was control. Control was power. He wouldn't strike unless he had no choice. The bikers didn't know it yet, but they were playing a dangerous game. And the boy they thought was an easy target. He wasn't sitting anymore. He was standing, grounded. Ready, Jaden stood frozen behind him, wide-eyed. The moment stretched thin, like glass under pressure. One wrong move, and it would all shatter. The park, so full of noise just moments ago, felt oddly distant now. All Kai could hear was the crunch of gravel, the rustle of wind in the trees, and his own breath, steady and sure. He didn't want this fight, but he wouldn't run from it either. The standoff was suffocating, suspended in that moment where everyone waits to see who blinks first. Kai stood between his brother and the bikers. Shoulders square, eyes locked on Rick Savage. The tension wasn't just in their bodies, it was in the air. Electric and brittle, Rick's fingers twitched again, hovering like a coiled spring. Kai could feel Jaden's small presence behind him, silent, scared, but somehow rooted in trust. And then it happened. Rick lunged forward with a sudden grunt, his hand shooting out in a shove meant to knock Kai off balance, to assert dominance, to humiliate. But Kai had seen it coming from the shift in Rick's weight, the narrowing of his eyes, the slight inhale before the movement. His body reacted before his mind needed to. With precise control, Kai stepped off the line of attack, pivoting slightly so that Rick's hand met only air. The biker stumbled forward a half step, caught off guard by the sudden absence of impact. Kai didn't counterattack, not yet, but his stance shifted, grounding him like an anchor. Calm and centered. Rick turned red-faced with embarrassment more than pain, but his anger surged like gasoline on a flame. "You little punk!" he spat. Stepping back in, but this time Kai moved. A controlled movement, quick, sharp, not aggressive, but effective. He struck Rick's wrist with an open palm, knocking the man's arm away while stepping into the space. Rick had left vulnerable. Rick yelped more from shock than pain and pulled back, clutching his hand. "What the hell?" he muttered, backing up a few steps. But Dax didn't wait. Fueled by ego and adrenaline, the second biker charged. His punch came in fast but wild. An untrained swing meant more for intimidation than precision. Kai ducked low, letting the punch whistle past his ear, and came up inside Dax's space with a swift, exact kick to the man's knee. Kai sent him crumpling down with a cry, grabbing at his leg. The onlookers, previously oblivious, started to turn. A small gasp rippled from a nearby parent. Phones came out, fingers pointed. The tension, once silent, was now erupting. Lenny hesitated for a split second, but rage overruled logic. He rushed in his arms, swinging wide, sloppy. Kai rotated smoothly, delivering a spinning heel kick that caught Lenny in the ribs. The breath left Lenny in a whoosh as he stumbled backward, folding onto the ground beside Dax. Rick was breathing heavily now, his chest rising and falling with fury. He charged like a brawler, both fists up, no technique, all anger. But Kai wasn't playing the same game. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to end it. He slid to the side, letting Rick pass again, then drove a precise strike with the heel of his palm straight into Rick's solar plexus. Rick staggered, choking on air, his legs wobbling like someone had unplugged him. He dropped to one knee, gasping, his confidence leaking out faster than his breath. The park fell quiet. The soccer game had stopped. Children stared. Parents froze mid-step. Even the birds seemed to hush. All eyes were on the boy in the black jacket standing still while three grown men writhed or stumbled around him. But Kai wasn't gloating. He wasn't shouting. He simply stood his ground, breathing steady, his hands at his sides. His voice when it came was calm, but it cut like a blade. "Enough," he said. "I don't want to hurt you. Walk away." Rick glared up at him, eyes full of pride and wounded rage. For a moment, it looked like he'd go again, that he'd rise and try one last time to prove something. But his body said otherwise. His muscles had lost their defiance. His breath hadn't returned. Dax was still curled on the ground, holding his knee, Lenny groaning and rubbing his ribs. The crowd around them had formed a loose circle, now phones filming people whispering, a few murmuring in disbelief. "Let's go," Rick finally growled, not looking at anyone. "Get up." He helped Lenny to his feet, grabbed Dax's arm, and led them toward their bikes like a general retreating from battle. The three limped across the gravel, the swagger gone. Just as they reached their motorcycles, Rick turned over his shoulder, one last flash of venom left in him. He pointed a trembling finger at Kai. "This ain't over, kid." The words hung in the air like smoke. Then the engines roared to life and the black vultures peeled out of the parked tires, spinning gravel, spitting behind them. The silence they left behind was louder than their exit. Slowly the crowd exhaled. Applause broke out in scattered bursts. A few cheers. Someone clapped Kai on the shoulder as they passed, mumbling something about bravery. But Kai didn't hear it. He turned to Jaden, who was staring up at him like he'd just watched a superhero come to life. "Are you okay?" Kai asked gently. Jaden nodded, speechless. He reached out and grabbed his brother's hand tightly. "Let's go home," Kai said, and they walked together slowly, silently past the crowd, past the stares, past the questions. But even as the danger retreated behind them, Kai knew something had shifted. The peace they started the day with was gone, and something told him Rick's final words weren't empty. This wasn't finished. Not yet. The walk home felt different, even though every sidewalk crack and tree along the route was exactly where it had always been. The sun had nearly disappeared beyond the rooftops, casting long blue shadows across the quiet streets. Kai and Jaden walked side by side, their sneakers making soft synchronized taps against the concrete. Neither spoke at first. Not because they didn't want to, but because the weight of what had just happened hadn't settled yet. Jaden kept glancing up at his older brother, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe, confusion, and the kind of fear that only shows up after danger has passed. Kai's face remained calm, unreadable, but his thoughts were swirling like a storm held behind closed doors. His body ached, not from injury, but from tension. The kind that lives in your muscles long after the moment is over. Finally, Jaden couldn't take the silence any longer. "Kai," he said softly, his voice cracking around the edges. "How did you do that? I mean, they were grown men, and you—" He stopped, searching for the right words. "You didn't even look scared." Kai exhaled slow and deep. He didn't stop walking. "It's not about being scared," he said quietly. "It's about being ready." Jaden frowned, still looking up at him, but they were huge. There were 3 of them. "Doesn't matter," Kai replied, his voice steady. "Size doesn't win fights. Control does." They walked a few more steps. Kai could feel Jaden's brain working beside him, chewing over every second of what he'd witnessed. "Were you going to hit them before they touched you?" Jaden asked suddenly. Kai said, "Fighting isn't the goal. It's the last option." He paused, then added, "You don't throw the first punch, Jaden. You stand your ground. You use your voice. And if that's not enough, then you finish it quickly, cleanly, and without ego." Jaden nodded slowly, absorbing it like gospel. "They said it's not over," he mumbled after a moment. "That guy, Rick." "He said it, I know," Kai replied. "And if they come back?" Jaden asked. Kai finally stopped walking. He turned to face his brother and crouched down to Jaden's level. His face was soft now, but his eyes held the kind of gravity that made Jaden listen. "If they come back," he said, "we'll deal with it together. But I want you to remember something." Jaden leaned in. "What happened today, this wasn't about showing off or proving I'm strong. It was about protecting someone I care about. You. And that only happens when there's no other way out. Jaden looked down at his sneakers, then back up. But... "What if I'm not like you?" he whispered. "What if I freeze next time?" Kai reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Being brave doesn't mean you never freeze," he said. "It means you keep standing even when you're scared. You spoke up today, Jaden. You didn't run. That's courage." Jaden smiled for the first time since the park, a small one, but it was real. They stood together a moment longer before continuing down the block. When they reached the house, the porch light was already on. Their mother, Kai Thompson, stood on the steps with her arms crossed and concern etched deep into her face. Her eyes flicked between her sons, scanning for injuries before either had spoken. "You're late," she said, voice sharp with worry. "I was about to come looking for you." "Sorry, Mom," Kai said as they stepped onto the porch. Jaden stayed quiet. Cassandra looked at them both for a beat, then zeroed in on Kai. "What happened?" she asked. Not accusingly, just directly. She knew something had Kai hesitated. He glanced at Jaden, who looked like he was waiting for his big brother to decide how much truth to tell. Kai turned back to his mother and chose the only thing that made sense: honesty. "There were some men at the park," he said evenly. "They tried to start something. I stopped it." Cassandra's eyes widened and her arms dropped to her sides. "What do you mean, men?" she asked. "Like adults." "Bikers," Jaden chimed in. "Big ones." "3 of them." Cassandra's mouth tightened and she turned back to Kai. "Are you hurt?" "No," he said. "And Jaden's fine too. I made sure." She stared at him for a long moment, reading his face the way only a mother could. Then she stepped forward and wrapped both arms around him, pulling him into a tight hug. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "But promise me, Kai, don't ever take that kind of risk unless there's absolutely no other choice." Kai hugged her back. "I promise." That night after dinner, and silence and one too many glances toward the window, Kai lay awake in bed. The house was still. Jaden asleep in the next room, his breathing soft through the wall. But Kai stared at the ceiling, eyes open. He thought about Rick Savage's last words. "This ain't over, kid." He knew those types. Pride doesn't walk away quietly. Kai wasn't afraid, not in the way most people feared bullies, but he felt something deeper: responsibility. This wasn't about a scuffle in the park anymore. It was about what came next, about who he would have to become to protect what mattered. And as he finally closed his eyes, one truth stayed with him like a heartbeat in the dark. Discipline wasn't just how he moved. It was who he was. 3 days passed without incident, but the silence only made the tension thicker. At school, Kai moved through hallways with his usual composure, answering questions in class, helping Jaden with homework in the evening, even attending karate practice, like nothing had changed. But every time he passed a reflective surface, his eyes instinctively scanned behind him. Every time an unfamiliar car rolled by the neighborhood, his jaw tightened. It wasn't paranoia. It was awareness. And awareness, Kai had learned, was what kept you 2 steps ahead of the storm. Rick Savage had made a promise, and men like Rick didn't make empty threats. They let them simmer, grow teeth, and then bite when you least expected it. It was Wednesday afternoon when the silence cracked. Kai was walking home from school with Jaden, cutting through the park where it had all happened. They'd avoided it for a few days, but Jaden insisted on taking the shortcut. Said it was fine now that no one would come back in broad daylight. Kai didn't argue. Part of him wanted to know, needed to know if that threat was still hanging in the air. The park looked unchanged. Swings swaying slightly in the breeze. Toddlers waddling after parents. A few teens kicking a ball lazily across the grass. But as they passed the old oak tree, Kai noticed it instantly. A motorcycle helmet sitting alone on the bench. Black scratched, with a red skull sticker peeling off the side. Kai's steps slowed. Jaden was still talking about school, not noticing. But Kai's senses screamed alert. He scanned the area. Across the street, leaning against a chain-link fence with a cigarette between his fingers, stood Rick Savage. He wasn't wearing his jacket this time, just a black hoodie and jeans, but it was him. The stance, the glare, the unfinished business in his eyes. Rick didn't move, just watched, waiting. Kai turned, slightly shielding Jaden with his body, and kept walking. "Let's take the long way," he said casually. Jaden blinked, but we're almost. "Long way," Kai said again, voice firmer. Jaden didn't argue. They turned down a side path looping through the residential streets behind the park, but Kai could feel it. Rick was following, not close enough to provoke, but close enough to send a message. The next morning, their mother found a folded note wedged under the windshield wiper of her car. No name. Just 5 words scribbled in messy block letters. "You think this is over?" Cassandra froze her hand, trembling slightly as she read it. When Kai came outside, she handed it to him without a word. He read it once, then again, then folded it carefully and tucked it in his backpack. "Do we need to call someone?" she asked, voice low. "Like the police?" Kai shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "He hasn't crossed the line." "Kai?" "This isn't a dojo," she warned. "This is real." "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm not going to swing first." That night, he didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, thinking not about fighting, but about how to end this without one. Rick wanted a reaction. He wanted Kai to make a mistake. Kai wasn't going to give him that. The next day after school, Kai went to the park alone. No Jaden, no backpack. Just him in his dark jacket standing in the open by the same oak tree where it had all started. He waited. 5 minutes, 10. And then Rick appeared, stepping out from behind the bleachers like he'd been waiting, too. "Didn't think you had the nerve to show." Rick called out, strolling toward him with a crooked smile. "Didn't think you had the nerve to write notes like a coward." Kai replied calmly. Rick's smile twitched but didn't fade. "You embarrassed me," he said, "in front of a whole park. In front of my crew." "You did that to yourself," Kai said. "I didn't start anything." Rick stepped closer. Too close. Kai didn't back up. "What is it you want?" "Rick," he asked, "because if it's a fight, you already lost one. You got lucky," Rick hissed. "You caught us off guard." "No," Kai said, voice quiet but sharp. "I was prepared." "You weren't." Rick's hands curled into fists. "Don't push me, kid." "Or what?" Kai challenged. "You going to jump another teenager?" In broad daylight, while someone probably has their phone pointed at us right now, Rick froze. His eyes darted around the trees. Somewhere, faintly, a phone camera clicked. "You want to keep being the guy who bullies kids in parks," Kai continued. "Or maybe you walk away now while you still can, with whatever pride you've got left." Rick's breathing was ragged. He wanted to strike. Everything in his body screamed for it. But Kai wasn't giving him the excuse, and that's what broke him. "This isn't over." Rick, muttered voice weaker now, Kay said. "But it can be, if you let it." Rick stared at him for another long second, then turned, walked away. No engine revving, no theatrics. Just silence. Kai exhaled, his body still tense but his mind clear. He had faced the shadow, and the shadow blinked first.